There's a particular story that comes to mind when my father was very young, probably 3, 4 years old, um, five, somewhere around that. His dream was always to be a fireman. That's what he wanted. Mother asked him, anybody asked him, his friends, he was going to be a New York City fireman. That was it. So he, did, as you will see throughout the series, various things to help and support the family, but fireman was at the top of his list. Whenever he could, he'd follow fire trucks. And the fire trucks, of course, back then were horses drawn by a tank of water and hoses to put out the fires in the buildings where they may occur. You're looking at fires in buildings that maybe back then, you got to think back then around the beginning of the 20th century, probably around 4, 5, 6 stories buildings, a lot of tenement buildings where people lived and so on, various hotels or movie theaters or whatever. Anyway, that's what little Pete wanted to do, wanted to be a fireman. Whenever he had the chance, whenever he was not working, and that which was very rare, very little time, he would go down to the closest firehouse in his area. Keep in mind, as I said earlier, you'll probably hear it a few times, he was born over on the east side of New York, 117th and Pleasant Avenue, which is a few blocks off the East River. People go down, he'd talk to the firemen and tell him his dreams, 5, he was growing, 6. What do you want to do, little guy? And he'd say, I'm going to be a New York City fireman. That was it. That's all he wanted. That was his dream. Be a New York City fireman. He'd see these horses go by if there was a fire, drawing a wagon that held, 250, 500 gallons of water with hoses and try to put out fires. And that was Pete's dream. It's all he wanted. It's all he talked about to his friends and so on. And as he grew, he went to the firehouses, maybe 1 or 2, depending on what was in the area near him. He talked to the firemen. Every once in a while, they used to get a kick out of the little kid, and they'd make him ride up on top of the seat where the driver and another fireman alongside of him would put little Pete in the middle, and they'd drive to a fire or whatever. Of course, they kept little Pete far away from it, but he would just be intrigued. Nothing to do with pyromaniac or anything like that. He just wanted to be a fireman. He thought that was the cat's meow. He thought in life that's what he wanted to do, help people by saving and putting out fires. Well, as Pete grew into his early teenage years, probably 15, 16, 17, there was an exam that came out for the New York City fireman that you had to take, an entry exam. And Pete, of course, back then, because of the amount of work that he did and had to do to support the family, he only went to a 7th grade education, which probably would be around, I would assume, 12, 13 years old, not much more than 13. But Pete was so involved and used to read anything he could on being a fireman. Well, he passed the exam. And with that, he knew that when he turned 18, he was going to be a New York City fireman. That was his dream. That's what he wanted. And then on one faithful day, as you will come to see, his father came to him and said, probably the latter part, 19, 20, 21 years old, that wasn't going to be the case, that he was going to go because the father had bought 300 acres upstate New York in the New Paltz, Hudson Valley area, and Pete was going to become a farmer. Keep in mind, Pete All that he knew at that time was the city, as barren and as little and as nothing, and horse-drawn carriages and paved streets and dirt streets and all. That's all he knew, close buildings and whatever. That's what Pete wanted to be. Well, that did not come to pass. His father told him that because he bought the acreage, that he was going to take the family upstate New York into the Hudson Valley area, and Peter was going to become a farmer. Again, all Pete knew was the city, shining shoes, moving furniture, working on the ice wagons and laundry wagons and playing with his friends and anything a normal child would do, except in Pete's case, he worked. And he worked 7 days a week, 12, 14-hour days to provide for those 9 brothers and sisters, including himself, along with mom and dad. Think about it. And all those dreams were vanished in a second. All that he had thought about for probably as long as he could remember, 15, almost 20 years, being a New York City fireman. Gone in the flesh. Now he was going upstate New York to become a farmer. He knew absolutely nothing about farming, like you knew how to educate a rock. As you will find out in this series to come, Pete did his obligation to his family, took over, and he did. But I try to envision that as the son of that man. Little Pete had dreams like each and every one of us. And in an instant, they were dashed. I don't know. Would you do it to your kid? Or what would your kid do? Pete did nothing. He just followed his father's directive, and he did. And he went upstate and learned how to be a farmer. As you will see in the upcoming series, if you follow, and I hope you do, not only is it informative but educational about a person that not only had the strength of his conviction, his desire to do, but his want to please and help his family. And so he did throughout his life. I thank you for listening. If you like, subscribe. If you have questions, if you have any stories of your own, please let me know. I'd be very interested in hearing them. Thank you very much for your time.